correcting her. Like usual, I have worked on this last night. Please hit that sub button to show some support, and let's jump right in. The buzzing of my phone jolted me awake. I swiftly muted it and tiptoed out of the bedroom, careful not to disturb my sleeping husband. Through the silent house I went, descending the stairs to the living room where my voice wouldn't reach Steve, should he stir. There, shrouded in the dim light, I released my pent-up frustration. "Rick, enough," I whispered sharply. "We're done, understood? This was never meant to last. You knew the deal. Once Steve finished his studies and things settled, we would end it. You were there at his graduation, remember? That was our goodbye. Now, please, no more calls." I paused, hearing his protests on the other end, but my resolve only hardened. Deep inside, I was touched by his feelings, yet they were unrequited. In spite of everything, I was devoted to my husband, Steve. "You won't say anything, Rick. You have as much at stake as I do, with your own marriage to consider. I'll admit, there were moments I'll remember," I continued. "But it's over. We can't keep this up. So, I'm cutting it off now." As I spoke, the lamp in the living room flickered on. I froze, facing the familiar, gentle brown eyes of Steve. I knew every detail of those eyes, the eyes that made me fall for him a decade ago when I was just 20. In my haste to leave the bedroom, I hadn't realized Steve wasn't there. The sound of Rick's pleading voice echoed from my phone as it slipped from my grasp, hitting the hardwood floor, the screen cracking but still working. The space between me and Steve, sitting there in his chair, felt insurmountably vast. My heart thundered in my chest, loud enough, I feared, for him to hear. The pain in Steve's eyes was unmistakable, their softness clouded with hurt, yet he held back his tears. The room was engulfed in a heavy silence, stretching on, though only seconds passed since the light came on. "I've been having trouble sleeping after the night shifts," Steve finally spoke, his voice calm yet strained. "I didn't want to disturb you, so I came down to unwind a bit." His voice was heavy with emotion, gaining strength as he spoke. Those initial words, spoken hesitantly, were his way of buying time. After a decade together, I understood his patterns. Logic was about to take the reins. "I have tomorrow off," he said. "Actually, the next 2 days. I'm going to dress and take my car for a drive. Maybe grab breakfast. I'll be back. It's just past midnight. I'll try not to return before 8 a.m. "But Steve, please, we need to discuss this," I pleaded. He raised his hand, signaling for me to be quiet. "I'm not leaving," he said firmly. "I'm giving you time to gather your things. When I return in the morning, I'll be exhausted, I'll sleep, like after any late shift. If you're still here, it won't be good. But I need to explain," I implored. "I'm sorry, you have to hear me out." He approached, and for the first time, I feared the man I had always known as kind and gentle. I was terrified he might lash out. But he walked past me, up the stairs. Moments later, he rushed down and out the door. His car faded into the distance. I sat on the stairs, weeping. "Is he heading here?" came Rick's anxious voice from the phone. "I've really messed up, haven't I?" I hung up, regretting I had even answered. I ignored the phone, lost in thoughts about the end of my marriage. I dwelled on what-ifs and regrets. I shouldn't have betrayed him. I should have embraced his desire to start a family. If we had children, I thought, it would have strengthened our bond. Steve adored children, and ours would have meant the world to him. I could have devoted myself to being the perfect partner for him. That was my intention, after all. The brief affair with Rick was nothing but a fleeting lapse. It was insignificant, yet here I was, crying on the stairs, while Steve drove away, putting space between us. It meant my marriage's future was uncertain, all because of a momentary mistake. I had always envisioned a future filled with love for Steve. For a decade, he had been my constant, the one I adored without reservation. Every day, I felt grateful for our union, cherishing him with every fiber of my being. The mere sight of his photo brought an involuntary smile to my face. Steve was my world. He had this youthful charm, despite our age, and a slender build that made him stand out. His sandy blonde hair and warm brown eyes were a stark contrast to my dark hair and light gray eyes. He often mentioned how much he adored my eyes, claiming they were his favorite feature of mine, at least in public. Privately, he had a different favorite, something that he believed made me uniquely attractive. This admiration from Steve meant the world to me, especially considering my own struggles with self-image. I wasn't overly confident about my appearance, but Steve had a way of making me feel special and desired. It was his appreciation that helped me embrace my own unique qualities. My perspective on physical affection was heavily influenced by my parents. Growing up, I often witnessed their open displays of affection, which initially made me uncomfortable. They were unlike the parents of my friends, who seemed more reserved. But with time, I came to appreciate the deep love and connection my parents shared, something I hadn't seen in other families. As a teenager, I felt awkward and out of place, especially in my own body. I envied the slender, athletic builds of some of my peers and struggled to find my own identity. Steve entered my life during my college years. He was studying business while I was still exploring my options, unsure of my path. I remember the first time I saw him. I was sitting with my friend Liz in the student center. Liz, tall and slim, seemed to effortlessly attract attention with her unique style and confidence, despite being quite different from the typical cheerleader look. Our meeting was a turning point for me, a moment that began a journey of love, self-acceptance, and discovery. Steve's presence in my life brought a new perspective, helping me see beauty in places I had never noticed before. She had a warm, outgoing nature, always beaming with a bright, sunny disposition. It was her charm that let her pull off antics that would embarrass most. So, when she abruptly stood up and left me mid-conversation at the table, I had no clue about her intentions. Upon her return, she was ushering a man towards our table, and I couldn't help but think she was on the verge of charming yet another person. She practically pushed him into a seat next to me, and I chuckled. "Found someone new, Lizzie?" I teased. "No," she grinned, "this one's for you." A wave of surprise hit me. I was just an average 20-year-old woman, with limited experience with men. My only significant encounter had been rather awkward, a year ago, at a friend's sleepover. I overheard a conversation the next day that left me mortified and decided to keep my distance from relationships. "What do you mean, for me?" I asked Liz, puzzled. "Every time I see this guy, he's looking your way," she replied. "Great, so he's noticed my physique," I said, a bit self-consciously. Just then, I caught the embarrassed expression on the man's face and Lizzie's suppressed laughter. "Stop it, you're embarrassing yourself," she said, still chuckling. "He's not looking at what you think. He seems genuinely into you." I hesitantly turned towards him, and something clicked. His warm, brown eyes seemed to captivate me entirely. In that moment, I felt a connection, unaware of the impact it would have on me. "You have the most captivating eyes," he said nervously, "and your hair, it's so." His words trailed off, but they didn't need to continue. In that moment, a new chapter began for me, one I hadn't anticipated. "Me?" I gasped in disbelief, thinking it must be a joke. He just nodded, a bit sheepishly. "Seriously, which fraternity is this for?" I prodded, half amused. He dashed off so fast, I doubt anyone could have kept up with him. Our initial encounter was anything but smooth. It took several more chance meetings before we went on our first date. Yet, once we did, it was clear to all that we were smitten. Things progressed swiftly, and within a year of that clumsy first meeting, we were married. In that year, I found a new confidence. Knowing that Steve adored me, I felt more attractive and vibrant. Embracing this newfound self-assurance, I swapped my long, flowing skirts for shorter, snappier ones. Reflecting on it, I realized I had become more like my mother, affectionate and open. Steve and I were inseparable, and marriage only deepened our bond. My parents often remarked on what a great husband Steve was. He'd go to great lengths to make me happy, but eventually, it wasn't enough. He decided to further his education in the medical field for better financial stability. After much discussion, Steve opted to use his retirement to fund his education and our living expenses, so we wouldn't be burdened with huge student loans later. Steve excelled in his studies, graduating top of his class. At the graduation ceremony, he acknowledged my unwavering support, crediting me for his success. But mere weeks after his triumph, we hit a rough patch. I mustered just enough energy to pack a bag, a few clothes, makeup, and essentials. I was willing to give Steve a few days, perhaps 3 at most, to cool off. We needed to talk things through. I couldn't bear to be apart from him any longer than that. "Steve." I drove into the night, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Barely 5 minutes on the freeway, I realized how precarious my state was. The last thing I needed was an accident, especially the irony of being wheeled into my own emergency room. The thought of my colleagues performing routine checks on me was almost comical, yet deeply embarrassing. Imagine them conducting a chest X-ray or a pelvic X-ray, maybe even a CT scan if they suspected a head injury. No, I couldn't risk it. So, I drove slowly, familiar with the late-night haunts due to my midnight shifts. Pulling into a cozy cafe known for its breakfast, I settled into a booth with a coffee, letting my thoughts wander. How did I end up in this mess? Rick, my neighbor, certainly wasn't more attractive than me, yet here I was, pondering over his inexplicable allure. Was it something exotic in his lifestyle that I lacked? These thoughts consumed me, leaving me feeling hurt and betrayed. The waitress, recognizing me, commented on my early arrival and inquired about my wife, the one I often boasted about. Hiding the truth about her infidelity, I nodded and brushed off her concern with a lie about a hectic night in the ER. Her words of admiration, calling me smart, considerate, and cute, only deepened my inner turmoil. If only she knew the truth about my wife's betrayal. Needing a change of scenery, I decided to drive to the river downtown. I had never seen the large boats at night or early morning, and I hoped the serene setting would offer some tranquility and clarity. Just as I started the car, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the console display. It was Sarah calling. I chose not to answer, letting it go to voicemail. She called a few more times as I drove downtown, but I wasn't in the mood to talk. Downtown was quiet. I parked and strolled towards the Riverwalk, finding solace in the gentle flow of the river. It had a soothing effect, calming my caffeinated nerves. I took a deep breath, savoring the fresh river air, and tried to release my tension and worries with a long exhale. Reflecting on my situation, I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't the end of the world. I was in good health, loved my job, and had my dream car. I wasn't facing any life-threatening illness or legal troubles. The only thing that had changed was my partner choosing someone else. And in the grand scheme of things, this was happening at a rather opportune time in my life. At 30, life was far from over. I had plenty of time to find someone new, someone better suited for me. I could still have a family. Financially, we didn't have much due to various expenses, which made things simpler in a way. If I went for an amicable split, I could just divide what little we had and move on. I even considered changing jobs, which could mean a brief period of unemployment, but it felt like a fresh start. Standing by the river, planning my exit from a decade-long marriage felt surreal. Sarah had been my dream for so long, yet now, I was ready to let go. Perhaps I needed time to process everything. As my phone rang again, I wondered if things could have been different if Sarah had shown the same persistence in our relationship. I realized I was tired, it was almost morning, and I had a weekend full of plans, including a neighbor's party. The thought of explaining our split to friends and acquaintances loomed over me. Would Sarah come to the party? What about Rick? Thinking of Rick reignited my anger. His wife Georgia would be heartbroken. They had a long marriage and 3 kids. Like me, Georgia didn't deserve this betrayal. She had invested so much in her life with Rick. I doubted she would leave him, despite the challenges ahead. They had their kids and years of history. Georgia deserved better. It all felt so unjust. I hadn't done anything to deserve this mess. Yet, here I was, trying to figure out how to deal with the situation. The early morning light crept in as my phone rang again. Without looking, I knew who it was. The familiar notification sound confirmed another message waiting for my attention. Glancing at my watch, I realized I had an hour before heading home. I drove to the nearby Major's, grateful for its 24-hour service. I wandered the aisles, selecting fresh fruits and vegetables, reminding myself to maintain a healthy diet now that I was on my own. I also picked up a couple of steaks, thinking they'd be easy to grill in the evenings instead of cooking a full meal. The shopping took longer than expected, and by the time I reached what used to be our driveway, I had a sudden realization. It was no longer ours, it was mine. A striking sense of solitude hit me. For the first time, I was truly alone. Carrying my groceries inside, I noticed 2 things. First, the fridge was already stocked with similar items. Sarah had obviously shopped for the same fruits and veggies the day before. Even the steaks were there in the freezer. Then, the phone rang. Picking it up, I braced myself, wondering who might be calling so early. It occurred to me that the caller might be looking for Sarah. Could it be someone she was involved with? Hello, I answered, my voice heavy with exhaustion. Steve, darling, I love you. Have you seen my note? Can we talk? I'm so sorry, you need to hear me out. She was pleading, but I couldn't listen anymore. I hung up mid-sentence. I grabbed a Honeycrisp apple and some Canadian maple turkey breast from the fridge. As I brewed a strong cup of tea, I decided to switch off the phone, seeking a moment of peace. After a brief snack, I headed to bed, but as soon as I lay down, a wave of discomfort washed over me. The thought of Sarah possibly bringing someone else here, to our bed, was too much to bear. I hurried down the hallway to the guest room, my mind racing with suspicions. I nearly collapsed onto that bed, but then it hit me, she was cunning. She knew I'd suspect any misdeeds in our bedroom. So, to throw me off, she might have used the guest room instead. The room seemed clean, but my trust was shattered. Feeling weary, I trudged down to the den. The sight of the sofa there filled me with the same doubt. I moved to the living room, but her note on the sofa stopped me. I couldn't bring myself to rest there either. The thought of sleeping in the bathtub crossed my mind, but I dismissed it, suspecting it too might be tainted by her actions. Eventually, I ended up in my car in the driveway, reclining the seat and cracking the windows for air. Sleep took me swiftly, given how drained I was. Waking up in the late afternoon, I felt a numbing sense of detachment. Stepping out, I saw Sarah on the porch, engrossed in a book. "Steve, honey, why did you sleep in your car?" she inquired. "I wasn't sure which beds or sofas in the house were free of your affairs," I replied sharply. She seemed taken aback by my accusation. Trying to maintain composure, she denied having any affairs. "You know about Rick, and that was a mistake. I would never bring him home." "I love you, Steve. I'm not that kind of woman," she insisted. I could barely stifle a yawn as I looked at her. "That's a weak excuse. Why are you here?" I questioned. "Steve, we need to talk. We can't fix this if we don't communicate. We belong together," she pleaded. "And you think I want to reconcile?" I asked skeptically. She affirmed her love for me, convinced we could overcome this. But for me, it was clear. "This changes everything," I said firmly. "Our marriage, our future plans, it's all over. After the divorce, you're free to live as you please. As for now, we're done." "You're making too much of this," she said. "Let me just explain, okay?" "Why?" I countered. "Maybe you need to rationalize it to yourself, but I don't. I don't need to hear why or how it happened. I don't care about the reasons behind your betrayal, ruining what I thought was a solid marriage. What's important now is that it's over between us." "Well," she began, "I see you're too upset to have this conversation. I'll try again tomorrow." "Don't bother," I replied sharply. "It's going to take more than a day." "Yeah, it will probably take you some time to process this," she admitted. "It's not about getting over it," I said. "I meant it will take time to find a lawyer and start the divorce proceedings." She laughed, disbelief in her voice. "You're not going to divorce me." You're hurt and confused, but you still love me. And, thinking about it, I realize I was incredibly selfish. But I love you as much as you love me, and I promise it won't happen again. I turned, heading back into the house. As she tried to kiss my neck, I pushed her away, sending her staggering. I locked the door behind me, resolving to change the locks first thing Monday. I showered, dressed in my favorite clothes, and stepped out onto the deck. I surveyed the yard. Sarah always nagged me about mowing it. She had transformed it into a beautiful space. We used to enjoy meals out here. Steve, is the hot tub ready? I'm definitely using it tonight, so finish up your car chat with Rick before then, shouted a voice from the next yard. Peering over the fence, I saw Georgia, the wife of the man Sarah had been involved with. At 45, Georgia was incredibly sociable and lively, a blend of nurturing and vigilance. She had a way of turning your worst days into memorable ones. Huh, I exclaimed, slightly puzzled. Did you forget about tonight's neighborhood barbecue? She inquired. Sarah offered your hot tub for everyone to use after dinner. I'll be one of the guests coming over. Her smile was radiant as she glanced my way. Feeling the strain from those late-night shifts. Huh, Stevie, she teased. I was a nurse once, remember? I understand how it is. Soon enough, you'll land a day job. Just hang in there, honey. I had indeed forgotten about the barbecue, but the thought of socializing and diverting my mind from my frustrations with Sarah seemed appealing. I headed to the nearby Kroger store, opting for it over Major due to its proximity and better pricing. There, I picked up a bouquet of roses and a couple of wine bottles. After returning home to grab some steaks, I made my way to Brian and Alicia's house across the street. They were always welcoming, and I could already smell the barbecue as I approached. Upon entering their yard, I scanned for Brian or Alicia. Suddenly, a commotion at the edge of my vision drew everyone's attention, erupting into laughter. All I noticed were some bushes rustling next door and someone's cries of discomfort. Steve, you and your pranks. Brian laughed, coming over to greet me. I take it those flowers are for my wife. She's over there. I handed him the steaks and presented the flowers to Alicia, who was surrounded by a group of women in their large gazebo. Oh, Steve, thank you so much. Alicia beamed, accepting the roses. The other ladies eyed the bouquet with a hint of envy. Steve, inquired Mary Sue Willis, the neighbor next to Brian and Alicia. What's the prank about? I'm not sure whether to be annoyed or not. What prank, ma'am? I replied respectfully. I always addressed Mary Sue and her husband Frank with ma'am and sir out of courtesy. We were all enjoying ourselves here. Rick was chatting with his wife Georgia, acting quite nervous. He kept looking around. The moment someone mentioned you were coming, he bolted across the lawn and jumped over the fence into my rose bushes. He must have gotten a few thorns, poor fellow. I wish he knew how much effort it takes to maintain those plants, she said, her tone growing more irritated with each word. I'm really sorry, Mary Sue, I began. You've seen our garden, so you know we're also keen gardeners. I can't fathom why Rick would do that. We haven't talked for a few days. I've been swamped with night shifts at the ER. I'm definitely not in on any pranks. But, yeah, we were fixing up his old car together. Well, mostly me, since Rick's not exactly handy. He still owes me for some parts, so maybe he's just trying to dodge me. You let him know that I'm not happy, and I expect him to fix any damage to my roses, she firmly stated. Understood, ma'am. I'll pass on the message if I see him, I assured her. I then walked over and sat beside Georgia, who had been watching me. Hey, Georgia, I greeted her. Hey there, where's your better half? What's all this fuss about with my silly brother? She inquired. You two aren't up to your usual mischief with water guns, right? I swear, if my hair gets wet, I'll be furious. I honestly don't know what you mean, I replied. No mischief that I'm aware of. She gave me a scrutinizing look. Where's Sarah? She probed again. She's staying with her folks for a bit, I shared. And you're not taking it well, are you? She observed. You seem really down. Yeah, I guess I am, I admitted. Why don't you visit her? But before you go, could you turn on the hot tub for me? She suggested with a smile. Georgia, the last thing I want is to go there, I sighed deeply. Oh, I see. A bit of a dispute, huh? Well, it's about time, she mused. After 10 years, it's normal. The honeymoon phase is over. Now's the time to really work on your marriage. She patted my shoulder, and I couldn't help but tear up. Suddenly, Georgia sneezed loudly. Sorry, Stevie, she apologized, then gently wiped away my tears. Cheer up. Excuse yourself with a smile and let's talk at your place, she whispered. I followed her advice, managing a smile for everyone as I got up. Go find your wife, Georgia said with enough volume for others to hear. I simply nodded and made my way towards the gate, leaving the yard behind. As I crossed the street, heading home, I realized attending the barbecue was a misstep. It was evident I wasn't as indifferent to Sarah's betrayal as I had believed. I caught a glimpse of Georgia entering her house as I entered mine. Sitting at the kitchen table, I pondered over where things went wrong. Before I could figure it out, there was a gentle knock at my back door. Why are you taking so long? Georgia inquired. I stepped onto the deck, and she greeted me with a smile, pointing towards the hot tub. I activated it and noticed she had changed into a more conservative swimsuit, complete with a lengthy cover-up, high neckline, and ruffles decorating the chest area. The design resembled shorts at the bottom and included additional ruffles around the waist. As she settled into the hot tub, a look of contentment washed over her face. "This is wonderful," she sighed. "If only your friend wasn't so frugal. I'd love to have one of these." "Georgia, my hot tub is always available to you," I offered. "So, what happened?" she asked softly. "How do you know something happened?" I replied. "With 2 decades of marriage under my belt, I've become quite the expert in these matters," she said with a hint of sarcasm. "If it were you who had erred, she would have sent you packing. Was it something trivial or truly significant?" She waited for my response, expecting me to open up. "She was unfaithful," I confessed. Georgia's eyes widened in shock. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that," she sympathized, taking my hand in a comforting gesture and pulling me into an embrace. "That man I married," she said with disdain. Her intuition surprised me. I had resolved not to tell her. Despite my own emotional turmoil, I didn't want to cause any distress to Georgia or her children. "Such a great friend he turned out to be," she continued with a hint of bitterness. "Now it all adds up. That's why he was so awkward at the barbecue, right? He's aware of Sarah's infidelity and, like some men, he's avoiding you during this tough time. What's with that? The two of you are practically inseparable, always golfing, fishing, or working on his car project, which you mostly handle yourself. Rick hardly knows his way around simple tasks. Like many men, he seems to shy away from deep emotion, preferring to avoid you until you've sorted through your feelings. Just wait until I confront him at home," she mused. I merely nodded. As much as I wanted to expose his actions, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Hurting Georgia and her children was out of the question. She was too good-hearted for that. She deserved better. I chose to endure my pain alone to protect her. "Stevie, believe me," she said. "I understand you're hurting. Have you thought about how you're going to deal with this?" "Yes," I replied. "Monday morning, I'm going to find a good lawyer and file for divorce." She seemed surprised. "Are you certain that's the best course of action? Is this the first time she's strayed?" She asked. "Why should there be a second time?" I replied, bewildered. "Listen, Stevie," she continued. "You both are still young, and you've had a remarkable run. Your marriage has been like a fairy tale for 10 years, which is rare. Most couples encounter struggles, like the 7-year itch, but you two seem to glide past it. Every time I see you together, your love is evident." I couldn't help but respond cynically, feeling betrayed by the love I thought we shared. "Steve, your perspective is a bit skewed," she said gently. "As far as I know, she still loves you deeply. It's unlikely that her feelings changed overnight. And about your suspicions, do you have any evidence that there was more than one incident?" "If she really loved me, she wouldn't have been unfaithful," I argued. "And while I only know of one incident, there's no telling if there were more. Why didn't she just ask for a divorce instead?" Georgia tried to reassure me. "We're all human, and humans make mistakes. Perhaps after a decade, she was just curious, or maybe it was a lapse in judgment. But regarding a divorce, I'm certain she doesn't want that. Ask any of her friends, they'll tell you how much she talks about you. She loves you more than anything, Stevie. She dreams of growing old with you. Being your wife is her pride. You mean the world to her, and deep down, you know that." "Rubbish," I muttered angrily. "She's been deceiving us all along. I've never been unfaithful to her. She was my entire world. Everything I've done since meeting her was for her. I can't get her out of my mind. But now, when I think of her, I just picture her with that guy. He can keep her. She's not mine anymore. So, you're just going to surrender and let this guy, whoever he is, take her away?" She chuckled. "No," I replied sharply. "He doesn't need to take her. I'm willingly letting her go. Like you said, I'm young enough to start anew and get it right next time." "That's just your hurt talking," she observed. "How would you know, Georgia?" I asked. "It's not your marriage that's crumbling." "No, it's not," she agreed. "My marriage is much stronger. It would take a lot more than Rick being unfaithful to break us apart. It wouldn't be easy for him, but we'd survive. And I know this because it's happened before. Twice." I was taken aback by her revelation. "But you two seem so harmonious," I stammered. "That's the difference between love and like," she explained. "Love allows you to separate the person from their mistakes. Love means accepting someone, flaws and all, and forgiving them when they falter. Like makes you abandon someone as soon as you realize they're not perfect and have made a serious mistake. The first time Rick was unfaithful, we'd been married for almost 7 years. He started behaving oddly and was overly kind to me. He even tolerated my mother, whom he dislikes. It turned out he had been with someone else during a business trip. The only reason I found out was because he unknowingly passed on an infection to me. I kicked him out and didn't speak to him for 3 months. Even after we reconciled and he moved back in, we slept separately for another half a year. I reminded him of his indiscretion at every opportunity. We'd be having a lovely dinner for our anniversary, and when he'd express his love, I'd retort with a cutting remark. It took 8 years and 2 children for me to really let go. And then, he surprised me again. I found messages between him and an old flame on his phone. We spent nearly 2 years in counseling. I learned a lot then. We'd been married for 15 years, and there were still things we didn't know about each other. I realized that some of my actions had hurt Rick deeply. I had almost driven him into the arms of that woman by the way I treated him. She came into his life and boosted his confidence, something I had been neglecting for a long time. Our home life was turbulent, to say the least. I was constantly critical of Rick, creating a tense atmosphere at home. Every opportunity I got, I was picking on him for past mistakes, ones that were so old we couldn't even recall the details. I often used affection as a bargaining tool, withheld my warmth on a whim. I resorted to harsh words, doing all I could to undermine his self-worth. In my mind, he had it coming. The turning point was something unexpected from our therapist. He wanted to observe our home life, so he joined us for dinner one evening. Rick, the kids, and I were all on our best behavior, naturally. The dinner went smoothly, and our therapist remarked, "So the two of you can be civil." I wasn't sure what to make of it at the time. What Rick and I didn't know was that our therapist had discreetly placed cameras in our kitchen and living room. At our next session, he showed us unedited footage from our daily life. It was a revelation. I hadn't realized how unkind I had become. In our routine life, away from the therapist, I was unrelenting. If Rick praised a meal I cooked, I snapped at him and refused to make it again. When he shared good news from work, I belittled his achievements. I was constantly harsh, insulting him without reason. When he shared his troubles, looking for empathy from his partner, I was dismissive. Once, when Rick narrowly escaped a serious accident at work, a coworker brought him home and explained the gravity of the situation. My reaction was cold and dismissive, but my worst moment was yet to come. During a severe snowstorm, when I was suffering from intense migraines, Rick and I were near the fireplace. He tried to comfort me, but I reacted harshly, leaving a visible mark on his face, evident in the video. "I have a headache," I shouted, storming upstairs. The sound of the door slamming echoed in the recording. My words were harsh and unforgiving. It took hours before I calmed down. Later, hearing a noise at the door, I ignored it, not sparing a thought for Rick. Eventually, our neighbor called, concerned about someone on our porch. Calling out for Rick and getting no response, I went to check, fully intending to confront him. When I opened the door, Rick stumbled into the house, barely conscious. I couldn't help but tease him. "Lost your key again, huh? Maybe left it at some friend's place." He was shivering. "So cold. Can't feel my fingers," he managed to say, thanking me for letting him in. I pointed out the obvious. "There's a blizzard out there. You'd have to be really careless to venture out in that." He asked me to check his pocket. I thought he was being absurd, but then I found my headache pills. He had braved the blizzard for them. Despite his effort, I didn't soften. I continued to berate him, wrongly accusing him of ulterior motives. He looked at me with such sincerity. "I just wanted to help," he said. I was taken aback, unsure of how to respond. I left him there, feeling confused and angry. We missed several therapy sessions because of Rick's frostbite and illness. When we finally returned, the therapist showed us videos of our sessions. Rick watched stoically while I couldn't hold back my tears. I confronted him. "Why do you tolerate this from me?" I realized then that despite his mistakes, I had been much harsher. It was a moment of self-awareness. He simply said, "People make mistakes. I've made mine, but I've never stopped loving you, Georgia. You're everything to me." I rushed out of the therapist's office, overwhelmed with emotion. It was a profound realization of Rick's love for me and a moment of truth about my own feelings and actions. That day, I understood the depth of his love and questioned my own deservingness of it. Rick had risked his life for me, a testament to his love. My anger suddenly subsided, and I felt like myself again. Well, almost. In a moment of heated judgment, I confronted Rick's high school ex. She had a rocky past, having been through multiple divorces and rumored infidelities. I knew I had to address my feelings about Rick, but direct confrontation wasn't my style. Instead, I found an indirect way to express my hurt. We had a young college student who helped us with yard work and odd jobs. One day, while Rick was away, I spent time with him, more time than I'd usually admit. He was 21, and I must say, it was an exhausting day for both of us. That's how I cope now. I realize Rick cares for me, and while he may not always show it in the most romantic ways, he's devoted. But when he falters, I don't talk about leaving or eviction. Instead, I find my own way to balance the scales. "So that's what you believe?" I asked. "That true love is a myth, and when someone strays, the solution is to stray as well." "Steve, what I shared might not suit everyone," she replied. "I just wanted you to see that Sarah's mistake doesn't have to mean the end of your marriage. Give it some thought, okay?" The following morning, I visited Home Depot early to buy new locks for the doors. I've always been an early riser, so I was there as soon as they opened. By 7:30 a.m., I had changed the locks on the front and side doors. I wasn't really worried about burglaries. My concern was more personal. The rear door and garage remotes could wait till the next day. After a rejuvenating morning run, I returned home and was just finishing my shower when I heard someone trying to enter through the front door, cursing in frustration. Descending the stairs, I saw Sarah struggling with the door. "Hey there," she greeted me cheerfully. "I thought I'd make you breakfast and pick up a few things. Maybe we could." "I don't think that's a good idea," I cut her off. "Look, Sarah, you can come in and collect your belongings, but I'm not ready to have a conversation. It's just too soon." "What about breakfast?" she inquired. "You've been running, you must be hungry." "Sarah, I need to learn to manage things on my own," I responded. When this is all over, we'll be back together, so I'll still be making your breakfast," she said with a hopeful smile. "I really wish you'd open up to me. Why are you putting us through this?" "Look, you're the one who brought all this trouble upon us," I retorted sharply. "So, if you're finding it hard now because of your choices, that's on you. Please, just go upstairs, get your things, and leave before I reconsider." My stern tone took her aback, and she paused before responding. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That's exactly why we need to talk. We need to sort things out, so we can move past this pain and perhaps find a way back to each other." "I've already said I'm not ready to talk," I replied. "We can discuss after the divorce." "Divorce?" she exclaimed, her voice rising in disbelief. "Who said anything about a divorce? You're blowing this way out of proportion. Can you really dismiss 10 years over a fleeting mistake? It was just a meaningless fling. Surely that's not enough to erase everything we've built. Are you saying you don't love me anymore?" Her voice wavered, tinged with desperation and disbelief. "I do, for now," I answered cautiously, "but I'm trying not to." "Why would you want a divorce then?" she asked, her voice edging towards hysteria. "Do you really want us to be apart? It's so painful not being with why. Wait, are you trying not to love me?" I nodded. "But why?" she implored, her voice filled with a mix of confusion and sorrow. "I feel almost sorry for you, but then I remember the years I devoted to our relationship, only to be betrayed. You cheated, you broke our marriage, our bond. You turned something so beautiful into something tarnished and fractured. Even if we tried to mend it, what would we be left with? Something ordinary and damaged. But we love each other," she insisted, her voice breaking. "We had trust, a special bond," I said. "I can't trust you anymore. That bond made us unique, and now it's gone. You were more than just a partner to me, you were a part of me. But that's not true anymore." She tried to speak through her tears, but I stopped her. "We both know it's not the same anymore. But I promise you, Steve, it was just a moment of weakness. There was no emotional connection. My heart is still with you, and he's committed to Georgia. I'm still yours, always," she pleaded. "There are 2 issues with that," I responded. "First, you broke our trust, so your words might not even be true. And second, it's not just about you being mine. I have to actually want to be with you. And, Sarah, I'm not sure I do anymore. You've changed from the woman I once loved. You've become something I can't even recognize," yelled Georgia from behind us. "How could you, Sarah? We were friends. Why my husband, of all people? I can't believe this." Georgia, noticing her husband sneaking away, chased after him. "Look what you've done now," I said coldly. "You've managed to wreck 2 relationships. Go inside, pack your things, and leave. I'll be in the garage. You don't need to tell me when you're gone, just close the door behind you." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "You clearly didn't love me as much as you said," she sobbed. "I made a mistake, and suddenly, I'm cast aside. If it's such a big deal, why aren't we trying to fix this? You don't get it, do you?" I sighed, heading to the garage. "Then make me understand, Steve," she implored. "Help me see your perspective." "I can't talk about this now," I said. "The pain is too raw. We need to talk, but not like this. I wanted to protect Georgia, but you've hurt her too. Just leave, Sarah. Let me process this. Haven't you caused enough pain?" She cried harder, then ran to her car and drove away. I spent the day aimlessly around the house, trying to find some normalcy before my night shift at the hospital. The night at work was usual. My job might seem odd to others. I wait for emergencies, then use my skills in radiology to help diagnose and treat the injured. It's a strange way to care for people, but it's what I do. On a quiet summer Sunday night, I found myself lost in thought. 2 things continuously played in my mind. The first was the image of Sarah's pained expression, a look that spoke of her genuine belief in our love, a belief that I would overlook her indiscretions. The second thing was the conversation I had with Georgia. In our brief interaction, she shared many insights, but 2 resonated with me. The first was about the true nature of love and unconditional acceptance of someone's imperfections and errors. This idealized version of love was hard to digest, especially knowing that Sarah had been unfaithful not once but thrice with Rick. It was beyond my comprehension to tolerate such repeated betrayals. Georgia's second piece of advice was more intriguing. She suggested a philosophy of retaliation rather than anger. This idea captivated me, and in the early morning hours, I found myself contemplating ways to retaliate against Rick. Inspiration struck during an incident at work. A patient came in with a broken hand, injured while fixing an air conditioning unit. His misfortune, caused by a fallen metal door, surprisingly brought a smile to my face, planting the seeds of a plan in my mind. My work schedule is unconventional, starting at 11 at night and ending at 7 in the morning. After my shift, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I made a quick stop at a hardware store, picking up a roll of thin, strong monofilament line, similar to what is used in movies and puppet shows. I had a specific use for this line in mind. Returning home, I immediately set my plan into motion. Observing Rick's house, I noted the lack of activity. It was just before 8, and I knew Rick's routine well. He would leave for work soon, aiming to arrive early to socialize with colleagues before his actual workday began at 9. This habit, particularly useful during Michigan's harsh winters, provided a buffer for any weather-related delays. Meanwhile, I busied myself with changing the lock on my back door, all the while keeping an eye on Rick's garage. Rick had a habit of emulating my actions, like storing his yard tools in a shed identical to mine, purchased immediately after I got mine. I even helped him assemble it, a memory that now added fuel to my plans for retribution. Having the shed meant that, like mine, his garage was exclusively for his prized vehicle, not the one he used daily, though. Rick and I were dedicated to restoring an old car, a model that was a marvel in its time and still held a respectable status today. Many cars these days boast over 500 horsepower, often relying on modern enhancements like superchargers or turbos. However, the charm of the Chevelle was its raw, unaided power, which was impressive even by contemporary standards. The Chevelle was a project in dire need of attention and care when Rick first acquired it. Georgia, his partner, initially wanted nothing to do with it. She bluntly told Rick, "Sell it, or just get rid of it. You don't have a clue about cars." After much persuasion from both Rick and me, she agreed to let the car stay, under the condition that he showed continuous progress. If he neglected it for more than 2 weeks, it had to go. For the past year and a half, Rick and I dedicated 4 or 5 days a week to the garage. It was a welcome distraction for me from the academic pressures, and for Rick, it was a chance to work on something he could be proud of. Once finished, it would be an impressive achievement. I overheard Georgia complaining to Sarah that she blamed me for Rick's newfound interest in cars. She said that if it weren't for our friendship, Rick wouldn't know the first thing about car restoration. Now, with our friendship strained, she feared Rick would be lost, unable to continue the project. I knew Rick well enough to predict his next move. He would spend time in the garage, making noises as if he were busy, but in reality, doing very little. This would be my opportunity to catch him in the act. As Rick left for work, I noticed him glancing towards my house with a look of longing. I wondered what he missed more, our friendship or his past indiscretions with my wife. He seemed subdued, possibly reeling from a confrontation with Georgia. I couldn't fathom how she tolerated his behavior. For me, the idea of forgiving such betrayals, especially repeated ones, was unimaginable. From my vantage point, I could see into their house. I watched Georgia move about, gathering clothes and heading to their bathroom. I was familiar with the layout of their home, having been there many times before. The bathroom had frosted glass windows, so I couldn't see inside, but my intention wasn't to invade her privacy. I just needed to gauge where she was and for how long. I hurried down the stairs, grabbed my roll of fishing line, and vaulted over the fence into their yard. I sneaked into the garage and loosely tied the end of the fishing line around the Chevelle's hood prop. I carefully removed the prop from its usual slot in the heavy metal hood. Initially, I struggled to keep the prop in place. Then I spotted a small dent in the metal, a couple of inches back. I positioned the top of the prop in the dent, and it held, though just barely. I threaded the fishing line out of the garage side window, over my privacy fence, and tied it to my deck chair. Stepping back, I could hardly see the line, which assured me that it would go unnoticed by others. As I prepared breakfast, a sense of satisfaction washed over me. I slept that afternoon, my dreams a mix of happy memories and bitter betrayals. I woke up around 5 in the evening to the sound of Rick's car stereo. He seemed to head my way but then turned towards his house. It was nearing 6, I had a few hours before work. Soon after, a loud argument erupted next door. Rick and Georgia were at it again, their voices raised in anger. Amidst the shouting, I overheard Rick's excuses and Georgia's sharp retorts. He pleaded for forgiveness, talking about a young woman's attention and his lapse in judgment. Georgia countered with reminders of their family and his betrayal. Their argument grew intense, with Georgia hinting at the possibility of divorce, mirroring my own situation. Rick begged for another chance, his voice desperate, but Georgia's anger was palpable. As I listened, I reflected on the complexities of relationships and the pain of betrayal, a reminder of my own turbulent experiences. "Please, just leave me alone," she said sharply. "I'm heading to the garage to work on the car," he replied. Georgia's laughter echoed, louder than her previous shouts. "Why?" she questioned. "You can't do anything with that car unless Steve is there to help. It'll probably end up like everything else lately. I just wanted you to know where I'll be," he responded. "I love you, Georgia. Until you trust me again, I'll let you know my whereabouts. Just leave me alone, Rick," she said. Rick disappeared into his garage, and I watched from my deck, hoping he would manage with the car. My deck was split level. The smaller area with a few chairs led down 3 steps to the main part. The back porch was so high that building the deck at that level would have required more materials and upkeep. The advantage was my clear view into Rick's garage. Georgia and Sarah used to sit on the higher part of the deck, watching Rick and me, sometimes sending us pizza and watching our surprised reactions. But those were happier times. As I observed Rick moving around in his garage, I was almost excited, so focused on him that I didn't notice when Georgia entered my yard. "We need to talk," she announced. "You knew who she was with, but you didn't tell me." "Why?" Georgia's anger was palpable, her breathing heavy. She was dressed simply in a t-shirt, which highlighted her figure in a way her usual attire did not. I remembered how she looked in a swimsuit a few days ago, realizing now how her clothes usually concealed rather than accentuated her shape. At 45, Georgia wasn't young, but her figure was still striking. She was curvaceous, a result of motherhood, with a flat stomach and hips that spoke of her life's experiences. Her frame was appealing in its own unique way, different from Sarah's but equally captivating. "Please, say something, Steve," she urged, snapping me out of my daze. "Georgia," was all I managed before falling silent again. "Steve, you might find this shocking, but I've been familiar with my name since I was a toddler," she said sharply. "What baffles me is why you kept silent. I actually felt sympathy for you. I thought there was a bond between us, a connection when we talked. It seemed like we were getting closer, sharing our stories. But apparently, I was alone in that feeling. It's always about loyalty among you guys, isn't it? Never betray your friends, right? Even if it means ignoring the truth. The so-called bro code. Friends before honesty, right?" "Georgia, stop," I interjected. "You're misunderstanding everything." It was a strange moment. I was trying to avoid fixating on her, while also keeping an eye on her husband, who had just moved into the spot I needed him in. "Georgia, you're not wrong," I continued. "I felt that bond too. Our conversations made everything seem better. You had that effect on me. Hearing about your heartache when Rick was unfaithful, I felt genuine sorrow for you. You're a wonderful person, inside and out. I couldn't bear the thought of causing you more pain. I was already hurting, why pass that pain on to someone who was just trying to help? Yes, I wanted to get back at Rick, and Sarah too, but not by dragging you down with me." She looked at me, her expression softening. "Like you said, you and Rick have 3 young kids together. They need a stable home. So, no matter how angry you are with him, breaking up isn't the solution. Why should I be the one to make your life harder? I thought I was being a friend by shouldering the pain alone. I believed I was sparing you from more hurt. What they did was bad enough, I thought it'd be better if only one of us suffered. I'm truly sorry, Georgia." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she reached out for a hug. Just as we embraced, I swiftly pulled my fishing line. A loud crash echoed as the car hood slammed shut. Rick's agonized scream filled the air. He continued screaming, and Georgia and I both reacted instantly. She responded instinctively to his cries, while I, being trained in medical response, sprang into action. Before Georgia could even get off the deck, I had already leaped over the fence, racing towards the scene. Georgia had to take the longer route through the gate and back to her house. By the time she arrived where Rick was, I was already in the car, releasing the hood. Rick was moaning, trying to shield his hands. "Rick, keep your hands still," I shouted. "Georgia, please bring some towels." Georgia headed towards her home, and I caught a glimpse of her children peeking curiously and nervously from the back doorway. I gently settled Rick down, attempting to check his hands. He was visibly agitated and restless. "Stay still, please," I implored with a raised voice. Observing his hands, I noticed they were badly injured and swelling, but thankfully, all fingers were intact. "The silver lining," I began, just as Georgia hurried over with towels, "is that you haven't lost any fingers, but you've got some serious cuts." Examining his hands more closely, I sighed. "Rick, it looks like you might have multiple fractures in each hand. Georgia, could you bring us plenty of ice and any pain medication available? Rick, we need to get you to the hospital." I supported him towards his car, his reliance on me evident due to the intense pain. Georgia quickly met us with ice, then dashed back for the medication. "She doesn't think he's in much pain," she remarked. "He's in shock," I explained. "He'll soon feel it more acutely." I carefully wrapped Rick's hands in ice and towels, and once Georgia returned, I gave him some pain relievers. She quickly arranged for their neighbor, Mary Sue, to watch her kids. Several neighbors had gathered, watching our small procession. Georgia joined us in the car, and we sped off to the hospital. At the I quickly briefed a resident doctor about Rick's condition. He noticed a large bruise on Rick's head, a sign the car hood had struck him there first. Rick was whisked off for a CT scan to check for any head trauma, with his hands to be attended to later. A nurse, new to me, started administering an IV for pain relief, crucial for Rick's stability during the scan. The doctor instructed me to get Rick's hands x-rayed post-CT, suspecting at least one badly fractured bone. I nodded in agreement, informing them I would handle it personally. "You work here?" the new nurse asked, surprised. I just nodded and briefly caught her eye. She was quite striking. Georgia, full of questions, pulled me aside. I explained the situation to her and guided her to the waiting area. Then, I headed to change into a spare set of scrubs, ready to return to the ER and continue assisting. Rick hadn't returned from his CT scan when I arrived at the X-ray room. My supervisor was there, working on a chest X-ray for an elderly lady. She looked up and greeted me with surprise. "You're really early," she noted, her smile warm. "You're not due for another 4 hours." I filled her in on the situation. I might handle his exams, then drive him and his wife home before returning for my regular shift, I explained. "You could also take the night off," she suggested. "I can call in someone part-time. They'd appreciate the extra hours." "Not on a Sunday night," I replied. "Plus, with all the drama with Sarah, I find comfort in routine. Work helps me cope." Rick's injuries were more severe than I anticipated, but thankfully not life-threatening. The CT scan showed only a minor head injury. However, his hands were a different story, badly fractured. Despite the medication, he must have been in a lot of discomfort. Throughout the procedure, a new nurse stayed close by, observing attentively. We watched as the orthopedic team skillfully set Rick's fractures and applied casts to both hands. Afterward, Georgia and I helped him into the car and drove him home. The painkillers had him dozing off before we even reached his place. "Thanks, Stevie," Georgia said gratefully as we drove. "You were so composed and efficient." "It's just another night on the job for me," I replied. "You're exceptional at what you do," she complimented. "You took charge and ensured Rick received immediate attention. He's fortunate to have you around." I couldn't help but be blunt. "Georgia, Rick and I aren't exactly friends. After what he did, that's impossible. I only helped because it's my job. In any other situation, I might not have been so obliging." "That's not true," she countered. "You're not that kind of person. And about our earlier conversation, it's not finished. We still have plenty to discuss." Did she ever explain why she did what she did? "I've barely spoken to her," I confessed. "And I don't plan to start now." "Do you really want to know the reason?" she inquired. "Georgia, it's irrelevant," I replied. "No explanation can make sense of their actions. Her confessing is just to ease her own conscience. I don't care about her relief. What about my pain? Forget about her." "She apparently pursued him," Georgia noted. I'm puzzled why. "I mean, sure, I love him, but he's not exactly a heartthrob. He's a middle-aged guy with thinning hair and a bit of a belly. Why would she be interested in him?" "If you're so curious, Georgia, you talk to her," I retorted. "Count me out. I've already got a list of divorce attorneys to contact in the morning." I drove us back and helped Georgia get Rick settled at home. "I warned him not to mess with the car without you," she said, her voice quavering. "He's clueless about cars. He just wanted to impress, even at his age. He wanted to belong. You like cars, so he pretended to as well." "Georgia, it'll be okay," I reassured her. "In a few months, this will all pass. Rick will get his casts off in a few weeks, then some physical therapy and exercises to regain his hand strength. He'll be back to his usual self." She embraced me, and I felt awkward but also stirred by her closeness. "Remember to pick up his prescription. They gave him strong medication at the hospital. When it wears off, he's going to need it," I reminded her. Back at my place, I ate and ignored messages from Sarah. I was oddly cheerful. I stepped out to my deck, tidied up my fishing gear, and disposed of it discreetly. With no evidence left, I was unconnected to the incident. I had an alibi too. I was with Georgia, away from the scene. I was the one who helped Rick when he got hurt. I chuckled at the thought of his discomfort, yet a part of me felt it still wasn't enough. I arrived at work to face a day filled with complications. Sarah was there, insisting she came to check on me. Apparently, a neighbor had informed her about an incident involving me, Rick, and Georgia at the hospital. "That wasn't me," I clarified. "Rick had injured his hands and needed medical attention." "Sarah, please, you should head back." "I'll go, but wait for you," she replied, asking for a key. I had to be clear with her. "By home, I mean your family's place or wherever you're staying now. Your constant badgering only delays any chance of us having a conversation." As she turned to leave, an unfamiliar voice caught my attention. It was the new nurse, introducing herself with a charmingly high-pitched voice. There was something about her tone that was captivating. Sarah shot a displeased look her way, but the nurse seemed unfazed, casually offering me a coffee. "I'm Amanda Green, just started here," she beamed. I accepted the coffee, grateful. "Thanks," I said with a smile. Sarah's response was sharp and scornful as she mocked Amanda's friendly introduction. Her threat was clear, aimed at keeping Amanda away from me. Amanda assessed Sarah briefly, then turned her attention back to me. She was petite, with striking features and a confident air about her. She inquired about Sarah and me with genuine curiosity. "She's my ex-wife," I corrected. Amanda then suggested we have lunch to chat. I simply nodded in agreement. Sarah's reaction was full of suspicion, hinting at the idea of revenge. She sarcastically wished me well, questioning if I'd be ready to talk the next day. I chose to ignore her and return to my office. The rest of the day passed with a few unexpected visits from Amanda, who preferred being called Mandy. Driving home later, my thoughts were a whirlwind of frustration towards Sarah, who had called multiple times that night. Once, when she expressed her difficulties without me, I ended the call abruptly and turned off my phone. I was grappling with a mix of emotions towards Rick, anger for his betrayal, and guilt for my own actions. It wasn't just about what he had done with Sarah. It was more about the trust he broke between us, the unwritten bro code that Georgia mentioned. The whole situation seemed like a tragic play where everyone was a victim in their own way. Georgia and I were betrayed by our partners. Rick, if his story was to be believed, seemed overwhelmed by his own insecurities, no match for Sarah's charm and flirtatious nature. If he really did resist her at first, perhaps he was as much a victim as Georgia and me. My guilt stemmed from a close call with Rick, where things could have gone much worse. The idea haunted me as I walked into my house, grabbed an apple, and sat on my deck, lost in thoughts about the mess my life had become. Georgia's voice broke my reverie. She offered to make breakfast and inquired about Rick. In her response, she revealed Rick's condition with a hint of satisfaction. He had broken hands, ironically now forced to restrain himself. She mentioned his attempts to gain sympathy, avoiding tough conversations by feigning pain and drowsiness. I advised Georgia not to be too harsh, suggesting Rick might not be solely to blame. She appreciated my perspective, calling me a good guy, to which I half-jokingly replied that I wasn't as good as she thought. My main concern was for their family, especially the kids, who shouldn't suffer because of these complications. A sudden exclamation escaped me as the weight of the situation hit me once. "What?" she inquired. "I always thought Sarah and I would have kids," I explained. "Seeing how adorable your kids are made us even more eager to start a family. We wanted to be like you guys, you know. Wait until we were financially ready so we could fully enjoy parenting without worrying about every little expense." Georgia was busy at the stove when I mentioned this. She then removed her loose outer shirt. Beneath it, she wore a t-shirt similar to the one from the night before, but this time it was apparent she wasn't wearing anything underneath. It was challenging not to notice the way her t-shirt outlined her figure, especially compared to Sarah's. As Georgia leaned forward, the fit of her shorts also caught my attention. My neighbor, in her 40s, had an undeniable presence. "Georgia, shouldn't you be with your kids?" I asked. "No, they're with their grandparents for a few days. I'm here to help Rick," she replied with a smile. "I'm all yours." She seemed cheerful, even as she said it. "Rick's been taking painkillers that make him drowsy," she continued, setting a plate in front of me. "I gave him some extra to make sure he rests. They work like a charm." While eating, I couldn't help but notice Georgia's appearance. The deep V-neck of her shirt was quite revealing. "These pancakes are fantastic," I said, taking a big bite. "And the bacon is the best I've ever had." "Thanks, it comes with practice," she responded. "Having a family teaches you these things." "You finished quickly," she observed as I completed my meal. "I need to discuss something with you. Let me get you some more." Before I could decline, she rose to attend to the stove. In doing so, she accidentally knocked over the syrup bottle on the table, spilling it on herself. "Oh no, what a mess," she exclaimed. "I better clean this up quickly." She took my hand and led me to the laundry room. In the laundry room, she started to remove her stained shirt. I couldn't hide my surprise at her uninhibited behavior. "When we talked the other day, I couldn't help but notice your eyes kept wandering," she remarked, her voice tinged with a playful tone. My mind felt hazy, captivated by her presence. She casually tossed her shorts into the washer, igniting a sense of daring. "Remember what I told you," she said with a sly grin. "Don't get mad. Get even." As she started the washing machine, she playfully tugged at my clothes. Her sudden exclamation, "Oh my goodness, that's surprising," left me startled. There was an intense connection between us, something I hadn't felt before. She was close, very close, and the intensity of our proximity was overwhelming. Then, in a swift movement, she climbed onto the washing machine, an air of spontaneity around her. She drew me closer, her warmth enveloping me. I had to slow down, focus on the moment. Her soft sighs filled the air as I gently caressed her, drawn to her expressiveness. The experience was new, different. She had a certain maturity, a depth that was intriguing. Her movements were confident, mesmerizing. I found myself captivated by her softness, her unique allure. Suddenly, she turned, bringing a new perspective to our encounter. There was a rhythm, a crescendo of emotions and sensations. We reached a peak, a moment of intense connection. Afterwards, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions, I suggested a shower. As we made our way, I was introspective, reflecting on the complexity of our interaction. In the bathroom, she opened the shower door, marking the end of an unexpected yet profound encounter. "What's wrong, Stevie?" she inquired with a curious glance. I shouldn't have led us down this path, Georgia," I admitted, feeling a twinge of guilt. "I apologize. Steve, it's not just on you," she said with a reassuring smile. "I came over here in a rather suggestive outfit." "I mean, what did you think my intentions were?" She stepped into the shower, the water cascading over her. She beckoned me to join, and as I did, she playfully started lathering soap on me. "So, this was about getting back at someone?" I questioned, trying to understand her motives. She nodded affirmatively. "It's part of my little plan of payback," she revealed, her eyes reflecting a sense of purpose, devoid of any remorse. "Interested in being a part of it?" I gave a hesitant nod. After drying off, we moved to my bedroom. She leaped onto my bed, signaling me to follow. I lay beside her, beginning with innocent kisses. She seemed to relish every moment. "Oh, Stevie," she exclaimed softly. Our embrace grew more intense and affectionate. I lavished attention on her, exploring gently, as she responded with quiet sighs of contentment. It was an intimate dance of closeness and care, our movements sinking in a tender rhythm. When our lips met, it was impossible to pull away. Our kisses grew deeper, filled with emotion and a newfound affection. She drew me closer, and in that moment, our connection deepened. It was a gentle, loving union, far removed from mere physical attraction. And as we lay there, still entwined, the world outside seemed to fade away. "Well, that didn't go as planned," she remarked afterwards. "Sorry," I replied. "I just went with the flow. Had I known your intentions, I might have approached things differently." "Steve, darling, that's just it," she said with a wry smile. "You did everything right. It was probably the most wonderful experience. but it wasn't about revenge. It was too heartfelt, too genuine. You've really stirred my emotions, honey. How can we possibly explain this as a casual fling? It's a good thing I'm settled with a family. If you keep making me feel this way, I might just get too attached. Georgia, I began, but then just nodded, acknowledging the complexity of our situation. You were up all night working, weren't you? She remarked. You should get some rest. I'm off to deal with my unfaithful husband. As I drifted off, my dreams were filled with alluring visions. Waking up later, I was relieved that the room didn't bear the traces of the morning's escapade with my neighbor. Opening the door, there was Sarah, lounging on the deck with her book. Finally awake, I see, she commented. Sarah, what about giving me space to cool off? I questioned. You switched off your phone, she replied. I had to check on you. I'm all right, I responded. Not that it concerns you now. We are married, she insisted. I care about you, and I didn't like the way that nurse was looking at you. You might make a rash decision in your state. And whose fault would that be? I challenged. Who's responsible for my current state? Sarah. Who shattered my life? She dashed off and sped away in her car. That night at work, she called. Steve, you're not even trying to forgive, she lamented. No, I'm not, I said bluntly, and she hung up. The next day, Georgia was there again. Hungry first, she teased. This started a recurring sequence. Georgia came over each morning, and we spent time together until exhaustion took over. The best moments were waking up next to her. Eventually, I met with my lawyer on a day Rick had a medical appointment. A month after Rick's incident, my lawyer prepared the divorce papers, serving them to Sarah at her parents'. This led to a series of unexpected events. When Georgia returned from the doctors with Rick, she found me on my porch. Rick was behind her, and as our eyes met, he waved, then stopped as I didn't reciprocate. Let's go inside, Georgia suggested. We need to talk. But Rick saw you come in, I cautioned. Don't worry about him, she replied with a reassuring smile. He probably thinks I'm here for a different reason. She pulled me close for a deep, emotional kiss. It was a powerful moment that caught me off guard. Steve, does being with me ever bore you? She asked. You see, Sarah and Rick's moments together were brief and sporadic. I'm sure of it because Rick has never been the type to linger. Their time was always very straightforward. I'm certain because Rick isn't the kind to venture beyond the basics. You're the first to really explore something different with me. Sarah wasn't as adventurous. Georgia, why are we talking about what they did or didn't do? I questioned. She led me upstairs, first making sure to lock the front door. I just want you to know, in terms of settling the score for their betrayal, we've outdone them by miles. You've had more than enough experiences to overshadow their actions, she explained. Georgia, I struggled to keep my composure. She unbuttoned her shirt and guided my hands. It's okay to say it, she insisted. Despite our age difference, I'm okay with being part of your scheme. We both had our fun, and I've certainly gained from this. This past month has been extraordinary. And Steve, I've had my own sort of payback as well. Actually, I need to tell you something. It's not about that, I replied, visibly upset. Georgia, there's something we need to address. Is it about the young nurse you work with? She asked, almost teasingly. No, I was taken aback. How do you know about her? Sarah mentioned her, she said casually. When did you talk to Sarah? I probed. She comes by every night after you head to work, Georgia informed me. She's curious about how you're doing. At first, I just wanted to get the full picture of her and Rick. That's how I understand their story. But I'm surprised you haven't taken the opportunity with the nurse. If I were in your position, I might have. You have this chance, and Sarah wouldn't object. What's stopping you? You, Georgia, I admitted. Steve, what's the matter? She asked, looking concerned. You seem distressed. Georgia, I can't shake off the feeling that you were using me as part of your plan, I told her. And the way you speak, it's clear you achieved what you wanted. But for me, it was never about that. The first time, I was taken aback. But afterwards, it was different. When you ask if I ever tire of being with you, know that for me, it was more than just a physical connection, except maybe that first time. I love you, Georgia. You're attractive, kind, and everything I wish Sarah would be. Before I knew it, Georgia had gently pushed me onto the bed, taking a position above me. She began kissing me passionately, a sense of urgency in her actions. I reciprocated with equal fervor, my hands exploring her figure. Our movements became more intense, a dance of desire and need. Love me, baby, she whispered. As passionately as you wish. I gently turned her over, continuing our embrace. As we moved together, I playfully reminded her that if Rick was nearby, he might overhear us. Let him, she responded with a hint of defiance. Even if he discovers us, I've earned this moment. Our rhythm intensified, a crescendo of emotion and connection. She whispered into my ear, a muffled cry of pleasure, as we reached a peak together. That was incredible, baby, she sighed, a tear glimmering in her eye. But you know it's too late, right? She added. So, if I had met you earlier, we could have. I started. Maybe we should get dressed and talk, she suggested. There are things you should know. After a quick shower, we sat, fully clothed, at my dining table. Don't look so serious, baby, she said with a smirk. You can have whatever you wish for. I'm not so sure about that, I replied skeptically. Okay, here's the thing. Rick mistakenly thinks I'm here to convince you to forgive him. He believes that your forgiveness is key to getting back on good terms with me. That's never going to happen, I declared firmly. Then let's just pretend, she suggested, her eyes gleaming. Revenge is sweeter when they don't see it coming. Wait, what revenge? I asked, puzzled. I've figured out the perfect plan against both of them, she said with a mischievous smile. My comment, you think OP is getting his revenge or he is just fooling around? Comment down below, sub and bell, and I will see you in the part 2 ending shortly.